Welcome to Attorney 911, the podcast, with attorney Ralph Manginello. Let's get some answers to the most asked questions. We break down the legal issues and provide expert advice to help you navigate life's legal challenges. You might even call us your first responder to a legal emergency. Up next, real-world cases, valuable insights, and practical tips you can use today. It's time to get smart like a lawyer.
I've known you for years and years now, and you're a seasoned family attorney and do some criminal defense also because of your badass criminal defense working husband, trial lawyer. And quick story, so we met at a continuing legal education seminar in San Antonio. I was a little bit late, I guess, to the session, and you were also standing out in the hallway, and you were just so nice to me. And you were like, hey, what's going on? What are you here for? You know, where are you from? And so we started talking. And then I went in and sat and tried to learn something. And later on that night, we were all hanging out, and I got to meet you again. And I was talking to Mark at the time. He's like, how do you know that? How do you know Taly? And I was like, I don't. She was just really nice to me in the hallway. And he started cracking up. And I was like, she was. I was like, she's awesome. He's like, no, she's super nice. That's great. So anyway, long story longer. Now, of course, you're married, and I wanted to wish you a happy, early anniversary because I know that's
Thank you. Yeah, it is. It's like in 2 weeks. So super excited. But I will tell you, I do loiter a lot outside of CLEs. I don't actually like to go to them.
Yeah, I know. And actually what's so, I guess, small world is we actually ended up working together and officing together. So it's like, that's so bizarre. And it was great. I loved working with y'all in that office.
Yeah, it was good to have you here. That was like pre-COVID, right?
I know. Yeah. When we were all together. So anyway, let's jump right into it. I know that when we started Attorney 911, illegal emergencies, one of the first things I thought of, one of the first people I wanted to have on was you, because you deal with real life legal emergencies all the time. I get people that call me and say, what do I do? My ex-husband did this, or I can't see the kids, or this and that. And I'm sure you get those calls all the time. So I wanted to have you on and talk about real practical situations, what people can do to help themselves, what the real world's like. So in your, walk of life, what are some of the everyday, like emergency type situations that you deal with, in the family law arena?
So obviously doing family law, it kind of seems like everything is an emergency, right? Just because when it comes to people's kids, it is the most important thing to them and in their lives. So any little thing that comes up or anything that deviates from their attention to their kids obviously constitutes an emergency. Some of those things, as you know, as a lawyer, not actually emergencies, but a lot of them can be. I would definitely say, like, as a family law attorney, the biggest emergency we get is, and you kind of alluded to it, is when they don't get to see their children. And that is because either, a parent is withholding the children because they're about to file for a divorce, or they've already had a custody battle, they have a court order, and the other party is not following that court order. That is obviously the number one emergency call we get, that like, hey, we need help now. We need to talk to somebody immediately.
And so I handled one divorce when I was, a young lawyer. And I remember one of the parents, I think it was the wife, had called me and was telling me, something of that nature. And I did not know what to tell her other than, I think you should call 911, because I think it was a real emergency situation. Like the dad was like grabbing the child or something. But so what do you tell, in most situations, the client that calls you with that sort of, emergency situation? Let's say it's, the divorce hasn't gotten finalized yet, but I guess there's temporary orders in place. But what's your normal course of, talking them through that, how to help themselves?
Well, I mean, like you said, I think that there's two different time periods of when that call can come in. The first is if there is no court order, they have not filed for a divorce, or they don't have temporary orders. And the second is that they do have some kind of an order, right? So in the first instance, if they have no order and the other parent is withholding the child from them, even if they call 911, even if they call the police are going to tell them that it's a civil matter, and they're going to refer them to call a civil attorney. In those instances, there's really not much you can do in that day, or obviously in that emergency, because there is not that court order. And so you do need to hire an attorney as soon as possible. That attorney needs to file into a court situation, and then you need to get orders for which that you can actually act upon. The second instance, if you do have a court order, then that's your first step. And obviously that's a great thing to have, because it's an order from a judge saying that this is your period of possession and that other party is violating it. Unfortunately, if you still call the police in that situation, they're still going to refer you to a family law attorney or to a civil attorney, because the cops' hands are really tied when it comes to these matters of a civil situation or of a court order situation. Everybody always thinks that they're going to get some kind of interference with child custody or kidnapping or anything like that. And the police just really honestly don't go down that road. So in that situation, I tell people, it is imperative that you follow your custody order to a T. If that custody order tells you to be at a certain place at a certain time, you must be there at that place and time. And then when you are at that place and time, then you call the police, the non-emergency line, and you ask to make a report, so that then we can show the court that we actually have proof that you were there at your date and time. And it's kind of tricky, because if you have a court order, you have to go to their front door and knock on their front door. You just can't pull up to in front of their house and say, I was there. No, you actually have to go to the front door, ring the doorbell, ask for your children.
Right. So just to clarify, don't call the police, don't call 911, because it's not going to get you anywhere. But second of all, if you have the order and someone calls their attorney, someone calls you, you're going to say, okay, did you do what you were supposed to do? Right. And then if they say yes, you're like, okay, well, let's make note of it. So just document everything that's happening, so when you do get in front of the judge, you can prove that you're doing what you're supposed to do.
Yes, exactly. And I even tell clients, take a selfie in front of their front door, call the non-emergency line, ask to make a report. Sometimes the officers won't even come out to make a report, but at least the fact that you tried to call them at the time listed in your decree will help. And then in that situation, if you don't have a report from the non-emergency line, I'll tell you to go to the nearest McDonald's or Starbucks and buy something just for $1, so that you have a receipt showing that you were in the area at the time. All of these things can help you prove your case when you do end up filing that enforcement, so that you can show the court that you were there at that day and time. Or, of course, you can bring a witness with you.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, that's smart. I like the buying something close to the location. That's smart. So if, let's say you're dealing with someone who, just hypothetically speaking, they're like, well, I don't have the money to hire a lawyer to help me, get my custody or see my kids at a certain time. And I need help with that. Does the court, criminal, have court appointed lawyers for that, or no?
No. So the only person that would be given a court appointed attorney would be the person that you are alleging violated that order, if you request jail time in your petition. So then that person, the offending parent, would be given an appointed attorney, because we're dealing with, a life or liberty situation that would fall under that criminal prosecution.
Okay. So a person that, they just have to file their own stuff. If they're like, oh, I need to get a hearing, they have to go down to the courthouse and talk to the clerk and say, I'm not seeing my kids, I need a hearing on that. And they kind of walk them through the process. Maybe.
They're obviously, they're not going to give them legal advice, but there are websites like Texas Law Help that do have some kind of fill in the blank forms for you to use. The thing about enforcements is, because we are asking for contempt, you are asking for jail time a lot of times with those enforcements. And because it does bring in that criminal prosecution into play, drafting on an enforcement is so very important, because if any little thing is wrong, then the court will throw the case out due to the drafting areas. Right. It's just the same thing as having a criminal indictment. They have to prove each and every part of that criminal indictment.
Right. So it's just to everyone's advantage. Get a qualified attorney to help you, because you're just walking through a minefield. You really do need someone that knows exactly what they're doing to jump in that arena.
Absolutely, especially with enforcement.
Yeah.
Enforcement is the biggest drafting area of, I believe, a family law practitioner.
So one last question on this issue. Will the court appoint a guardian ad litem for the kids in that kind of situation where, I mean, the kids are kind of in limbo? Does the court appoint someone to kind of assess what's really going on? Because you've got two parties that are like, no, it's their fault. No, it's their fault.
Not typically in an enforcement, because in enforcement, and again, when we're talking about enforcement, I'm talking about you have an order and they're violating that order.
Right.
They usually don't appoint an amicus in that situation, because the only question before the court is, do you have an order, and is this order violated, and can you prove that violation? It doesn't take into account any of the other parts, unless that parent would be claiming that the reason that they violated is because also an emergency issue, like, a CPS case or a criminal issue. And then at that point, you definitely need to have an attorney, because there are going to be a lot of filings going back and forth very quickly.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, I think our listeners and subscribers can appreciate that. Let's say, I get calls like everyone I refer to you. I don't know whether they're a good case or not, but some people call and they say, hey, Ralph, I want to get a divorce. It's agreed. Like, we both want to get divorced. Everything's going to be easy. You've had that call, I'm sure, a lot too, and it's never easy. But in that type of case, what's the usual customary, not just process, but like how much do you charge as a retainer for what someone would call an agreed divorce, even though we both know that that's very rare?
Well, kind of in that instance, like as you say, we both know that's very rare. I've learned throughout my career, because I used to charge, an agreed fee. Like you said, those agreed divorces tend to go sideways very quickly, because it becomes very apparent that they haven't discussed child support, or they haven't discussed paying out for the equity in the house or something like that. So in those situations, if somebody comes to me and says, like, hey, we have an agreed order, we've, made agreements on anything, I still charge them my normal rate. But obviously, in a family law situation, when you have a retainer, anything is returnable that's unused. So I anticipate not using a large chunk of your retainer, and then I'll just return it to you at the end of the case. As far as the process goes, when you have an agreed divorce, the initial thing would be to file that petition, and making sure that other party understands that just because this is an agreed divorce, I only represent one party. So I'm representing the person that paid me, and that's the person that I'm going to put their name on my petition. And then once I file that petition, I will send it to the other party, letting them know that I represent their spouse, with a waiver of service, letting them know that it is my understanding that their agreement is that they are not choosing to get served with process. They're going to sign a waiver of service, and that waiver of service basically means that I will not enter anything into the court without their signature on it, or without notice to them of a hearing. Right. If they sign that waiver, then that's a pretty good indication to me that they are willing to kind of proceed with an agreed divorce. And then I usually just shoot them an email with, these are the terms that I've been given by your spouse. Let me know if there's any issue here. If there's not, then I begin to finalize the final decree. And then after 60 days, I will get signatures and enter it with the court.
Wow. So that probably happens more often if it's like a younger couple. They don't have a lot of assets. They don't have children. They don't have businesses together, like that kind of situation.
Oh, definitely. Like, for sure, it happens if you don't have assets. Occasionally, it will happen with children, just because in Texas, we have a lot of presumptions regarding what the family code says regarding children, possession orders, child support. Those are pretty standard mathematical equations. So as long as the parties are educated on, what the options are, what they have agreed to, then you can still do it if you have kids. But agreed divorces are very common in families with no assets.
Right. And so, in your practice, I know you've been doing this for a long time. and you're very skilled. What counties, I know Harris County is super, super busy, but do you also practice in Montgomery and Fort Bend and all around?
I practice primarily in Harris County. I do have cases in Fort Bend, and I do have cases in Galveston. So those are kind of the three counties I practice in. As far as the other counties, I really just haven't had a need or a reason to travel that far. It's
Right.
hard to get to know judges in so many different courts. And it's very important for your client's best interest that your attorney actually has appeared before that judge at least a couple times.
Yeah. I remember when, especially Montgomery County, if you're taking cases up there, you're like, oh, in your brain, I'll just drive up there. I'm going to handle this and drive back. Well, all of a sudden it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you're like, why am I here? And how did I get here? And I'm definitely not getting paid enough to be
Exactly. While the law is the same across the state of Texas, the way that the different courts implement the law is very different. So you definitely have to understand the court you're walking into.
Yeah. So if somebody's saying, okay, they come to you and they're like, I'm thinking about getting divorced, but I'm not ready. I'm worried about, my business. I'm worried about what the kids are going to do. I'm worried about this and this. And they say, but I want to be prepared. My wife and I aren't getting along, or the wife's with you. So my husband and I aren't getting along. Is there something you would tell them, briefly today, but you just say, okay, well, if you already know you're getting divorced, get these ducks in a row. What would you tell someone that comes to you and says, I'm going to need your help, but maybe not today?
Sure. So the number one thing is document gathering. I definitely make sure people try to educate themselves as much as possible. That just means going through your cabinets, going through your home office, figuring out where bills are coming from, figuring out where banks are that may house assets between the parties, even just knowing what an envelope, which bank that envelope is coming from helps me, because then when we do discovery later on, I can see there's not an account coming from Bank of America, and I know that you are getting envelopes from Bank of America. So then we can do a subpoena to that specific bank. So, and randomly, discovery and document gathering always tends to shock clients on how hard it is and how much time it takes. So I'm like, the quicker you can get started on that, the longer time you need, because once we get into a divorce, you're only going to have 30 days to do that and to produce those documents once requested. And it always takes longer than what people anticipate. The second thing that I tell people is do not leave what you're going to request, right? So if you want to be the primary custodian of those children, do not leave the children. Do not move out of the home and go, rent an Airbnb for a month and leave the kids in the other spouse's care, because then you're setting yourself up not to be that primary parent. If you want to be awarded the home, don't leave the home. If you want to be awarded the car, don't leave the car. Because courts are very, like you said earlier, courts are very busy. They want to keep consistency and they don't want to upset the apple cart. So if you've already been doing something, they're going to be just fine going along with whatever you've already put in place.
Yeah. I mean, the courts don't want to spend time sorting your stuff out. They want you to have it sorted out if you can. And of course, they don't want to be moving kids back and forth and then making their, schedules all messed up. So I think that's a great advice that you would give someone is if you plan on doing XYZ, then start doing it now. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So primarily, just in your case, do you mostly represent more women or men, or is it about even?
I would say that I probably do have more men clients, just because in family law, it seems very common for a man to want a woman to sit beside him in court, and sometimes a woman wants a man to sit beside her in court. I don't really know why that is psychologically, but it does tend to be more men. Additionally, I think my personality is very direct, and I tend not to handhold a lot, and I just really want to move down the road. I'm not going to be your therapist. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with things that I don't think are pertinent to your case. And so sometimes my personality also goes a little better with the men in the cases as well.
Yeah. Well, whoever comes to you, man or woman, I know that they're in good hands. I've actually seen you in the courtroom do your thing, and you're fantastic. So to everyone out there, whether you're a man or woman, you're in great hands with Taly. So lastly, this is like probably a hot button question, but in your, you've been doing this for a long time. I think probably both men and women cheat on their spouses, right? But in your experience, and who's the bigger? Is it more women or men, or about 50%?
That's a good question. I would put it about equal, I would say. The crazy thing is, because in Texas, we do not have legal separation here in Texas. So as far as the state goes, you're either married or you're divorced, right? And so sometimes those divorces can take a year to 2 years. Sorry, my office light just went off. So sometimes those divorces can take a year to 2 years. And like, honestly, tell me that you're not going to be dating after you've been separated for somebody for a year and a half. So by the time that final divorce, pretty much everybody's guilty of it, at least dating. I don't know about actual infidelity, but so I would say at the end of the day, it comes out pretty even.
Yeah. I mean, I figured that, especially in this day and age, 2024, it's probably going to be equal. Whereas like in maybe 1955 might have been different, but I kind of figured that was going to be the answer, but I just wanted to kind of ask you and see what
Putting
you thought.
me on the hot seat here, Ralph. Trying to get me in trouble.
Yeah, exactly. So lastly, because I don't want to let you go, I know I want to respect your time. What do you see as like a trend that's happening now that may be a trend more in 2025 with just regards to family law in general? It may have to do with kids or technology or whatever. Just what do you see happening more and more that you're kind of like, wow, that's interesting, and that probably going to extend into 2025?
What's not a funny trend, but what a trend that I am seeing that happens more often, that is randomly not even a family law issue. People think it's a family law issue, but it's not. People are starting to buy property together and not get married. And I know that that's been happening for a long time, but I think even more today, people are having children, they're buying property together, they're buying cars together, and they're not actually getting married. A partnership agreement without an agreement in place for what happens when that relationship goes sour, those issues can be very tricky to handle. When you're dealing with real estate, obviously we call it a partition. It's in the real estate code. It's very expensive. It takes a very long time. People can, look at Tom Sandoval, Ariana, that whole reality TV breakup, and see the drama that happens when you own a house and you're not married. And then personal property is very difficult as far as like vehicles and things like that. There's really not a place to put those things. So I would just really recommend to people, if you're preparing to engage in these financial decisions with people and you're not marrying them, then you need to have some kind of cohabitating agreement or a partnership agreement so that you can dictate those terms if the relationship doesn't end up going how you think it's going to go.
Wow. Yeah. I could see, I did never even thought of that, but I could see how that could be a major issue, because they're like, well, we've been together for X amount of years. Like, why can't we just go to family court? And you're like, no, doesn't work
like that. Yep, exactly.
So then is there still the same definition for common law married, or has it changed at all, or is it the same definition?
No, the definition is the same, but a lot of times these people who are living together and buying property together, they are not holding themselves out to be married. They are very clear that, we are in a relationship and we are, buying this house together, but we are not married. And so they'll even go so far as to filing paperwork saying that we're not married, we're not common law. But then it leaves up to determine, what are we going to do with this property? Because especially a house, now that house is 50% each of your separate property, and a family court can't divest separate property. So you end up living in a home that you guys can't get rid of unless you go the real estate route of a partition.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And the insight's fantastic. Seeing you again is fantastic. Please tell Mark I said hello. I miss y'all, and I hope we can get together soon. I really appreciate you coming on, and hopefully see you soon.
Yeah, of course. No worries. And if anybody ever needs to get a hold of me, Our website is
Yes.
thetexasy.com. My name is Taly Thiessen, and you can call the office and get scheduled a consultation to meet with me.
Absolutely. If anybody needs anything with regarding family law, or her husband is a badass criminal defense attorney, call them, get over there ASAP. They can definitely help you. Thanks,
Ralph.
Taly. Good to see you.
You just learned something new. Attorney 911, the podcast, with attorney Ralph Manginello. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and helpful. Don't forget to subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode, and share it with family and friends who might benefit from the things we talk about. A new podcast launches every week. That means you get more legal tips, real-life cases, and expert advice. This is Attorney 911, the podcast.